you. Hi, everyone. Can I get a quick show of hands? How many of you have purchased clothing in the last 5 years? Hopefully most of you. And can I also get a show of hands? How many of you know which brands made those clothing? How about how many of you know which country those products were produced in? Still a couple? And how many of you know the legal requirements in those countries? Not many. So this is the problem, right? We all need clothes. Most of us wore them here today. But most of us have no idea where or how they're made. I would take a guess that most of you don't know that in Bangladesh, the legal wage for garment manufacturers is $68 per month. Most of you probably also don't know that the Aral Sea, once the world's fourth largest lake, is now 1/10 of its original size as a result of over-irrigation for cotton farming. And you also might not know that there's a saying in China that you can tell the it colour of the season by the colour of the waterways. I'm Sam. I'm the founder of a company called Origins, which is a supply chain tracking solution for the garment industry. And we want to be able to educate and empower consumers to make the very best choices when purchasing clothing. So I come from a military background. I spent 6 years as a logistics officer in the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and I mainly worked in supply chains. I focused on RFID. I did my master's in how RFID could enhance the security of supply chains. But my specific interest in fashion and how this could also be applied to the fashion industry really came about from my involvement in a business called Little Yellow Bird. So 4 years ago, I started this fashion company which makes organic, fair trade, ethically produced uniforms with complete transparency right back to source. Today, we're one of the leading suppliers of ethically made uniforms, and we supply several hundred businesses with their uniform requirements. When I first started this business, I naively thought that knowing where and how they were produced at a manufacturing level was the most important part of that process. While this is super important, and it's an essential part of our brand, there are actually many other layers involved in this process. So as I mentioned, we trace our cotton back to source. It all comes from East India and is grown by small-scale farmers that rely exclusively on rainwater and natural farming techniques, so no chemicals or pesticides used in the process of growing this cotton. It's ginned, which is the process of removing the cotton seed from the usable fibre under a local cooperative model. And then it's taken in bales to be spun into fine threads. We knit all of our fabrics, which is the process of taking those fine threads and producing a fabric in-house. And then we also know where and how our products are dyed, because if you don't know, this is one of the most toxic elements in a garment supply chain, with many companies around the world still getting away with dumping toxic waste into waterways. So all of the water that we use in our process is treated and restored back to drinking quality, and it's a completely closed-loop system. So 96% of the water that we're using is able to be reused again for the next batch of fabric that needs to be dyed. And I can tell you from personal experience that it is in fact safe to drink it after this process. So Little Yellow Bird is a fairly unique brand. We have a proven business model and we do turn a healthy profit. And we're wanting to do this because we want to prove that you can make money in this business without exploiting people or the planet in the process. So we measure 3 key things, and we communicate these to all of our stakeholders. But what we've been seeing again and again is that a lot of our competitors and a lot of other fashion brands are starting to make unsubstantiated claims about what they're doing in their supply chains. Consumers are becoming increasingly confused about what this all means, and when people become confused or overloaded with information, they just tend to switch off. So our goal at LYB was to change the industry, but it's pretty unlikely that one fashion brand alone is going to be able to do this. And so that's kind of where our whole journey with blockchain and specifically with NEM started. So earlier this year, we submitted a proposal to the NEM Community Fund to build a supply chain tracking tool. So the NEM Fund is essentially a pool of money for impact projects that want to build on this technology. And the proposal process is completely community-driven. So anyone can actually go and look at the forum, anyone can vote on these projects, and once the project reaches a specific threshold, you're allocated a certain amount of money. So our project reached that threshold earlier this year and was successfully funded. We received $1.2 million in non-equity funding to start development of this tool, and it's delivered in a milestone basis. So we have a chunk of work that we have to do, and then we get a chunk of money in return. So we totally recognise that there's a lot of hype around this, and that blockchain alone is actually not going to solve or eliminate a lot of the issues that are in the fashion industry. But we can see that through certain applications, we can improve the current system. Because the current system is super paper-based, very clunky, time-consuming, and leaves both the brand and the consumer with little or no information about the process that happens. So as you can see, this apparel supply chain is complicated. And if we drill down specifically into the cotton supply chain, which I took you through earlier, even a simplified version, you can see that there are numerous steps along this chain needed to produce even a really simple product, like a t-shirt. So while most brands are operating at this level and are relying on things like annual audits or third-party verification systems at the very end of the supply chain, the gold standard, or what we want to see everyone move to, is operating and having transparency throughout the entire system. Today, the most preferred method, or one of the methods that is used to ensure we have traceability along the supply chain, excuse me, is a system called GOTS, which stands for Global Organic Textile Standards. So this is just one of many systems, but under this system, each supply chain node is paying around $5,000 a year and has to submit their information to a central database. A brand, or actually anyone along that supply chain, can request a transaction certificate, but this costs me about $50 every time I want one and can take between 2 to 4 weeks to actually get hold of, and even then it only tells me what's happened at the previous step. So theoretically, if I can get hold of this, the chain has to be, everyone has submitted the information, but I don't get visibility on what that is. So we can see that a possible next iteration would be moving this system to a blockchain, thus enabling brands and consumers to have better access to this information and see the product journey at the point of sale. So given we have quite good existing relationships with our Little Yellow Bird supply chain, we're currently conducting a pilot with relatively simple features, but to work out which specific areas would enable the highest possible adoption rate from other brands, and also what would represent the most value for consumers. So our current trial does incorporate a QR code system. We've sewn it into our garments, and when we scan it, it pulls up the product-specific information relating to that specific batch. I think we've got a little video that sort of shows you how we'd be tracking that information. So now we recognise that this doesn't solve all supply chain inaccuracies. And similar to GOTS, it still has that element of human error. But it does represent a huge improvement on the current system. And when we combine this with other practices such as composition testing or organics diagnosis, it gives us an instantly available and unchangeable chain that if that batch fails one of those tests, we can go back and identify and isolate where that issue has come from. But we also don't want to just rely on QR codes. And while most people in this audience may have a QR code scanner on their phone, I can tell you that most of my friends don't. So we want to make this really easy for people to use. What we know that most people do have on their phones are things like Snapchat and Facebook Messenger. So we're currently exploring how we could actually integrate these things, because what we really need is to change consumer behavior. And we know that if consumers buy something and they understand the impact and they understand that product journey, they're going to be more likely to want to share about that and share it on something like their Instagram or Snapchat story. The current system, fashion, is completely broken, and it's also really unsustainable. And with a lack of information, people are actually buying into a system that they potentially don't even believe in. We think that blockchain has an opportunity here, or at least the ability to be able to identify where these problems are occurring. And we want to be able to support brands like Little Yellow Bird and other eco-conscious labels to be able to better compete and for customers to be able to choose products that identify with their values. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing, and our team is here, so we would love to connect with anyone. Thanks.